about marriage, and this class is about marriage. So we're gonna talk about the 5 fundamentals of a healthy marriage. Now, before I talk about that, I want to just mention something about marriage, and that is that there are a lot of things that make a marriage happy, but there are 5 fundamentals to a healthy marriage.
So what's the distinction between a healthy marriage and a happy marriage?
It's a good question. I was just talking with a client the other day that I've been doing some marriage coaching with, and one of the things they kept asking me, well, when are we going to be happy? When are we going to be happy? And I tell them, here's the thing. Your happiness does not depend on your marriage. Your happiness depends on you. But the healthiness of your marriage depends on what you're doing to make the marriage healthy.
So you could have a healthy marriage and still be struggling with emotional issues in general.
Correct. You can be unhappy and have a healthy marriage. You can be happy and have an unhealthy marriage.
So why worry about having a healthy marriage if you might still be unhappy?
That has to do a lot. Well, why do you think? I say this, but why would it matter?
Well, I think when you're talking about happiness in this context, you're talking about your day-to-day emotions. How do I feel today? How do I feel right now? When you get up in the morning, you say, "How are you today?" And I say, "Oh, I'm grumpy," or "I'm cheerful," or it's how I feel right now. And when you're talking about long-term, you're talking about health, it sounds like a long-term thing. For instance, you can't say about your body or your own personal well-being, "Today I'm healthy." Like, you don't wake up one day and say, "Boy, I'm healthy today. Yesterday I was unhealthy." You might say, "I'm making unhealthy choices one day and healthy choices another." But as far as like your general fitness level, you're somewhere on a spectrum of fitness, and you're every day moving towards being more fit or moving towards being less fit, right? And that's kind of a health metric,
right?
But your emotions, they're this roller coaster. They're this oscillating thing that varies a great deal from day to day, but they are dependent somewhat on your overall fitness. If you are working hard to develop healthy habits, overall, over the long term, you'll have more positive moods than you would otherwise. And I think that's true in a healthy marriage too. So you might say, "I'm not happy today. I wasn't happy yesterday. I probably won't be happy tomorrow. But if my marriage is on a stable ground, I'm likely over time to have more positive emotional experiences than I would if my marriage was unhealthy."
Yes. And so really, so a healthy marriage will help you in your quest for happiness. It won't hinder you.
Yes.
Whereas an unhealthy marriage will hinder you in your quest for personal joy and happiness.
Yeah.
But
it also has benefits to society at large. Healthy marriages promote all kinds of good things in society. They help promote strong families and healthy children. They help promote strong communities, and those things in your personal life too. Besides your happiness, they promote other good things in your life.
Right. So here's one of the things that's
so really, that's not just an excuse you're telling your clients who want to be, they're coming to you to be made happy, and you're like, and it's not just that you're failing to make them happy and you're making an excuse by saying, "Oh, that's not the goal here."
No, most of my clients, by the time we're done working, they are happy, because they're doing the work to be happy. But they're doing 2 different types of work. You're doing marriage work to have a healthy marriage, and they're doing personal work to have a happy life.
One of the things about happiness that I think is really interesting is it has this paradoxical nature. And we see this in the way the Savior talks in the New Testament about he who seeks his life will lose it, and he who loses his life for my sake will find it.
Mm-hmm.
And happiness acts on this paradox that when you're seeking happiness, you will almost certainly be unhappy. Like when happiness
Right.
itself is your primary goal.
And that's why when a couple comes into me and they say we're thinking about getting divorced because we're unhappy, and I think, well, that's like the worst reason to get a divorce, because you're unhappy.
Because divorce almost never makes people happy.
Well, I've never seen divorce make somebody happy. It's never led, even people who are in abusive relationships who do need to get a divorce because for their own safety, the divorce doesn't make them happy. Losing a marriage relationship doesn't bring anybody joy. I've never seen it where that brings people joy. I've seen it where people have told me, oh, I'm so glad I got out of that relationship. I'm so happy. And yet they're not. They're miserable. And they say they're happy, but it doesn't take very long before they realize themselves that they're actually miserable.
And it doesn't mean that that was the wrong decision
No,
necessarily.
No, it doesn't. Sometimes it's the right decision. And like I say, in abusive situations, your safety is important. And if you need to get away from somebody for your safety, now when I'm talking about abuse, I'm not talking about what a lot of modern people talk about abuse, like he called me a name or she wouldn't have sex with me last night. Like, that's not abuse. It's not nice, but it's not abuse. I'm talking about actual abuse where you're actually in physical or psychological danger. Nowadays, everything is considered both physical and psychological danger, and that's not what we're talking about. If you're unhappy in your marriage, it doesn't mean that your marriage is what's making you unhappy. You're unhappy because you're unhappy. Your marriage doesn't make you happy or not happy.
Yes.
A healthy marriage will help you in your pursuit of happiness.
Yes. And happiness itself cannot be your primary goal. But health is a pretty good primary goal that leads in health in many areas of your life.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons I think that we decided on the name Atwater Healing for your business, is because you're promoting health in all areas of life.
Right.
Healing towards
and
health.
Healing and health. And the thing is, if your goal is happiness, the problem is this life is not about just being happy all the time. In fact, eternity is not about being happy all the time. If you think about it, Jesus Christ, we know, was not happy all the time. That he had periods of where he really struggled and was unsure of where he was in Matthew. He says to Peter, James, and John, I am sorrowful unto death. That's not happy.
No.
Being sorrowful unto death is not happy.
And I think the reason it's important that we're talking about this right at the beginning is because we aren't in control of our emotions the way that we're in control of our actions. And even in the way that we can control our thoughts. We can influence our emotions through our actions and thoughts. But we're going to have a wide range of emotions. And if we're always labeling those emotions as being, even the label just positive emotions versus negative emotions is sometimes really unhealthy, especially when we're talking in marriage. And if we think about if I'm having an interaction with my spouse where I feel discouraged or where I feel frustrated or where I feel unhappy in some way, that's not necessarily a negative thing. That's a human thing. And we're going to have positive emotions. Well, no, I just said we don't want to do that. We're going to have a wide range of emotions. And
some of those emotions will be comfortable, and some of those emotions will be uncomfortable.
That is a better distinction.
And I think that we have to recognize that uncomfortable emotions are a part of what helps us grow and learn and become what our Heavenly Father and our Savior Jesus Christ are.
But I do think that when we're healthy, we have longer periods, more sustained periods of comfortable emotions that help us to deal with the periods of more intense, uncomfortable emotions.
I think that's true. I think the biggest thing that impacts whether we're having comfortable emotions or uncomfortable emotions is our attitude. Whether that's our attitude towards our marriage, whether that's our attitude towards our life in general, whether that's our attitude towards our family. If you are maintaining a positive attitude in the way that you speak about and towards people, you are more likely to be happy than if you maintain a negative attitude in the way you speak to and about people.
Great. So now that we've talked about why we want to work on the fundamentals of a healthy marriage, why don't you talk about how you came up with these fundamentals, or why you believe that there are fundamental principles to health?
That's an interesting thing, because so years ago I developed what I called the fundamentals of healthy living, 5 fundamentals of healthy living.
And where did these come from?
And these actually came from a series of scripture studies that I was doing. I was listening to conference talks from general authorities from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and also reading through the Book of Mormon and the New Testament at the time. And as I read through these different works, the scriptures and the talks, I kept running into the same things. That if you do these 5 things, you're going to be healthy. Now, it doesn't mean that that's all we need to do, but it's like, these are the 5 things that if you do them, you're going to be healthy, and you're going to have the strength to overcome temptation.
And then you saw, as you worked with many, many clients in implementing these things first, that they made a lot more progress in the other things you were doing if they had these things in place first.
If you implement these, in fact, what I've actually found is, if you don't implement these things first, they don't make the change in the other areas. They might come in and say, hey, I want to change in this way. And I'd be like, okay, great, let's try that. And we start putting together some goals and some tasks to get to that goal. And every time they fail if they aren't doing the 5 fundamentals.
So these were things that you discovered that if these things weren't in place first, people couldn't make other positive changes.
Correct.
All right, and so you've been working with these for a while, but the idea of there being specific principles for marriage is a newer one.
Yeah, this we developed. In fact, to be honest, I developed it Monday.
Oh, this is Monday. Wednesday.
So this Monday, and this is how it got developed. I'm teaching a parenting.
So when you say you developed it, you mean these are ideas you've already had in your mind, but they coalesced into the realization that there are these 5 principles. So these are all things you've already been teaching in marriage.
Oh yeah, definitely. But so what would happen with this is I was teaching a parenting class, and one of the students asked a question about how to be a good parent and a good spouse. Like, because I guess we were talking about the idea that your focus should be on your spouse and yourself and God, and that your children are second. They are not your focus. And that kind of is a revolutionary idea to a lot of people, because a lot of people think, oh, my kids are always first. And so as I was teaching this, that you need to put your spouse first, and your children come after your spouse in importance and in influence in your life. And then they were asking, well, how do I do that? How do I put my spouse first? And that's where this came from. I was like, okay, how do you put your spouse first? Let's think about that.
And you thought about the basic things that you've been teaching to couples for the last many years, and like, what are the things that I always set in place first when I'm working with a couple?
Right, that create a healthy relationship between a husband and wife that actually allows you to put your spouse in the focus of your life. And these are the 5 fundamentals of a healthy marriage relationship that allow you to bring your spouse into the focus and keep anybody else. It's kind of a barrier to keep anybody else from getting into that focus, which children very easily get into that focus. And oftentimes we'll see parents will get into that focus, or more often than it ever should, church callings will get into that focus, and they will take over the place of your spouse, and your spouse will take a secondary role to your calling, or to your kids, or to your parents. And so these are the 5.
Not to go off on a tangent, but can you distinguish how letting your church service take precedent over your spouse is different than having God be the first place in your life?
Oh my goodness, I can't today. I would love to.
Okay,
but
just to make note that when we're talking about your spousal relationship taking precedent over other things, we are always talking about your relationship with God being the most important relationship.
Your relationship with God is also your focus. So your focus should have 3 people in it: you, your spouse, and God. And God is always, I always think of it as a triangle. And God is always at the top, the peak.
Yeah, and a lot of people use the image where with the triangle where you have God at the top and you have the spouses at either leg of the triangle, that as you each come closer to God, you come closer to each other. The triangle becomes smaller.
The triangle should become smaller, and the triangle should always be equilateral. Equilateral in that each of those, each angle, and should be the exact same degree.
So one spouse shouldn't be progressing much closer to God, and the other one's getting left behind.
Yeah, that would be a
but
super
you don't get
unhealthy.
to control your spouse. So
nope, you don't, and that is
I
why.
bet this is a tricky one sometimes.
It is, except for that if you're doing the 5 fundamentals of a healthy marriage, it won't be tricky. It'll be easy. This is the point, is these 5 things are so important to having a healthy marriage.
All right, let's end this first introductory lesson by just listing off the 5 fundamentals, and then we're going to have one lesson on each fundamental. And these will just be introductory lessons to this. We're going to have classes later that are more advanced going into the topic, but we'll introduce each fundamental. We'll talk about why it's important
and how to implement it,
and we'll give
marriage.
And we'll give some homework assignments for working on that fundamental.
So here are the 5 fundamentals of a healthy marriage, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to say this too. Sorry, I want to make sure that you know they are in order of importance. So when I say number 1, that means that's the most important one. That is the fundamental one.
And in priority of how you should implement them.
Correct. Well,
not necessarily?
Not necessarily.
All right.
But like when I'm working with a couple, we will decide which ones to work on together. Like for example, one of the couples I'm working with right now, we've decided that we're going to implement steps 2 and 3 right now, and then after we get those going, we'll go back to 1.
Okay, but they are in order of highest priority to lowest priority.
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
so number 1, and this is just, I can't stress how important this is. Having a couple's prayer and praying with real intent.
Okay, so that's 1.
I didn't finish it.
Right.
Praying with real intent and attention. And the attention I never used to say, but you pointed out to me how important that was, and I realized that needs to be added in there. So it needs to be pray with real intent and attention.
Yeah, that's a Charlotte Mason principle. The habit of attention is the fundamental principle of education. That you can't learn anything until you learn how to pay attention to what you're trying to learn.
Right, if you're praying and you're not paying attention to what you're saying, it's not a prayer. It's not real. So you have to pray with real intent, and we'll talk more about that.
Yeah, we don't want to really go into talking
in our next lesson. The second fundamental of a healthy marriage is all of a sudden my mind has gone blank, and I just developed this tool, so it shouldn't have.
That's why we should have written them up where we can see them while we're doing this.
So
but actually, the second is the 20-minute
thank you.
conversation.
20-minute discussion. I don't want to call it a conversation.
Sorry, 20-minute discussion.
And there's a reason not to call it a conversation, but we call it a discussion, and we'll talk about that in our third lesson and clarify that. But a 20-minute discussion, that is essential. I can't tell you, that one was surprising to me when I first started doing this. And this is a tool that I didn't learn in graduate school or anything. This is a tool that actually primarily comes from the Book of Enos, in the Book of Mormon. And as I read the Book of Enos, we'll get into that. We'll get into that later. But
we're not very good at just going through a list. Maybe I should be listing
so
these.
So number 3 is date night.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm trying to go fast. Number 4.
That's okay. And we will have specific rules about how you do date night correctly and how you do date night incorrectly. And a hint is almost everyone does it incorrectly.
That is true. Number 4 is physical intimacy.
Okay.
And again, we'll have rules about that too.
All right.
And last, the final of our fundamentals is complimenting your spouse.
Oh, that's the one I was going to forget.
Yeah, you should never forget that. But I'll tell you, that's one that, again, very few people do it. Very few people. And when I give people the assignment to compliment, they are surprised at how difficult that assignment is, just to compliment your spouse.
You were so smart to come up with this list.
Oh, see how wonderful that is? You're
What
great at complimenting.
you just really, such a great marriage counselor. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
So we are going to finish this introductory lesson with a brief homework assignment. And since we haven't really done that much yet, the homework assignment is to look at the 5 fundamentals and to talk about whether you think you're doing or not doing them. Now, you don't have a lot of information about all of them, but just from your initial impression, make kind of a brief list of which one. Actually, this is a better way of saying it. Make a brief list of which ones you think are going to be the easiest for you to implement, and which ones you think are going to be the hardest. Actually, I don't know if that's a good homework assignment.
I'll tell you what. No, it is. But but I'm gonna modify it for you.
Yes, let's do that.
Okay, so this is the homework assignment. Write down the 5 fundamentals, just the basics, and write them down. 1, pray. 2,
20-minute conversation.
Discussion. 2, discussion. 3, date. 4, intimacy. 5, compliments. So just one word for each one. Write it down, and then put a green check mark beside it if you feel like, or put a check mark, some positive mark if you feel like this is something that we're already doing. Put an X or a red mark by the ones that you feel like you're not doing, and then
you feel like you're not doing well,
and then sit down and discuss together what you feel, how you feel about each one of them, and then next week when we start getting in next lesson, when we start getting into these different ones, we start giving you a more information and a full understanding, then your conversations will change and grow. So I think it's a great assignment. We just want to simplify it.
Yes. Yeah. I totally agree. Not that I have to agree, but I do.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. We'll see you in our next lesson.